All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. This is Dama Absher, and I'm one of the technical assistant specialists with Florida's PBIS project. And prior to joining the project, I worked in a Florida school district, and I was a district coordinator there for our PBIS efforts, and worked in the district and district level positions for about 18 years. And with me today is Brooke, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brooke Curtis. I am new to the project this year, and I've been working with districts up in the northeast section of the state. My previous background was as a school psychologist and supporting schools at the school level with their implementation of school-wide positive behavior support. So we welcome you here today, and I'm going to go ahead and get started with our chat. This is going to be the first in a series of chats really designed to help support school level coaches as well as district level coaches and points of contact with their implementation of PBIS. Other chats in this series are going to focus on increasing buy-in and using your data for effective database decision making in order to sustain your PBIS. We'd like to kind of get a little bit of a feel for who is with us today beyond just your role and what county you serve, but an idea for what level of implementation your school is at this point. If you're a first-year school, if your school is in implementation 2 to 4 years, you haven't begun implementing, you're kind of getting just an idea of how things are going, or if you're at 5 or more years. Okay, great. I see those answers coming in. It looks like we have quite a few veteran schools out there joining us today. So we'll definitely try and focus on what are some next steps and actionable items that you can do moving forward with your implementation. Also keeping in mind that if you're new to your role, what you can do to help support the school that you're at that is further along in their implementation than maybe you are in your coaching series. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end that poll right now. And our goals, hold on, having a little problem with my PowerPoint here. There we go. Our goals for today, again, is really to provide some strategies and examples of effective teaming. And we're going to talk a little bit about the teaming process, because it really is critical to establish early on, as we feel that it can lay a foundation for a lot of the other effective critical components of PBIS to kind of filter through. We'll talk a little bit about how to use your benchmarks of quality and those critical elements to integrate into your PBIS systems of support, and hopefully direct you to resources that target your school's individual needs. If you have any specific questions as they come up, go ahead and write them in the chat box, and Betsy can always chime in and let us know in case we miss it as we're chatting along here. But hopefully, again, our focus here is to help those that are early implementers really get a jump start on some of those key components and how to take it from there. And then those schools that are a little further along, maybe experiencing some drift, how to really restart and help sustain their PBIS system. As I mentioned, we're going to spend a little bit time talking about the teaming area. Although we find that there's no really one area that says you have to start here. We're focusing on this area because with building an effective team, and in our experience, having the structure in place, it allows for all of the critical elements to kind of filter through this team. And first and foremost, these are those areas that you get trained on when you've gone through a tier 1 or a booster training. We talk about these being those critical areas. So as you get started at the beginning of the school year, really getting back with your administrator and looking at their level of support, and have you been able to secure their attendance at the monthly meetings, things like that. I know we had some administrators joining us here today, and so, you know, having an understanding of how critical of an element it is to being part of that team and making sure that they're there. So that would kind of be one of those first checkoffs if I'm one of the facilitators, is making sure that I've got that their attendance secured at our monthly meetings. We'll talk a little bit about the implementation schedule, and those are all things that have to be run through your administrator. We'll talk a little bit about the roles and responsibilities, and again, the meeting structure and how it reflects your action planning. Those are going to be kind of our 3 key areas as we talk here in teaming, because ensuring you have enough people to fill those roles and responsibilities and you have an effective meeting structure will help make your PBIS team more successful. I didn't see that we had too many first-year implementers on here with us, but for those of you who are in your first or second year or maybe just finished a booster training, at all of our trainings, we usually give you some time to action plan next steps as we go through each of those critical components. And so if you just left your Tier 1 training, ideally you left with things kind of being a draft or a tentative plan of what your meeting dates and times are. And so at this point, during your pre-planning and rolling out in these first few weeks of school, really solidifying that schedule, again, with that administrative buy-in. Our ongoing teams, if it hasn't been done, what does your meeting date and time schedule look like? That blue box there is kind of meant to be a takeaway of here's some 3 things that if I haven't done this yet for my PBIS team, especially if you're the facilitator and point of contact, these would be some actionable steps to walk away from today's chat, knowing I need to make sure that team members know our meeting dates and times. Again, I've sat down with my administrator, maybe took 5, 10, or 15 minutes to kind of go through that master calendar and making sure everything's cleared there. And then, do we have enough team members to sustain the year? Excuse me, especially for those of you who are in that 5+ year, perhaps you have staff turnover. Do we have enough members to get us through the school year?
So you'll see a theme as we go through our TA chat today of kind of bouncing back and forth, because we thought of different ideas that we've seen work well in either our experiences in districts or in working with districts around the state. And so it seems like a common sense strategy, but just a reminder to go ahead and create meeting invitations for your monthly meetings throughout the entire school year. Even if those need to be changed later, at least there's a placeholder. Go ahead and invite all the team members to those meetings for the year. And what you can do from there is insert draft agenda items as you go. So if something comes up in a meeting and you want to remember that's something we need to discuss, let's say in October, then you can go into your October meeting invitation and add some draft agenda items just to keep everything organized. It also helps to remind folks of the meeting location, the time, and that way you're not scrambling to figure out where are we going to meet? Do we need to change the location of our meeting? You just know that it's really kind of organized and set for the entire school year.
Yeah, and just one other thing that as Dama was speaking, I thought of when you talked about where is the meeting being held, that's yet another thing that you want to discuss with administration. Do we have a location where we can hold our meetings that is set aside just for us to have those meetings? Next, we go into a little bit about what is the implementation for that team here. So we kind of just gave you a sample. This one is part of our Tier 1 training binder that you can certainly find going back to that resource or looking at your your drive that we hand out to you there. You can find it in the miscellaneous tab. But this is just a rough overview. You can see this is date by date what a team was planning on doing in terms of rolling out PBIS to their faculty in school. Your implementation schedule can be as detailed or as sparse as it is to fit your school needs. The important piece is that you're carving out the time. So in terms of getting started, again, if you're a first year team or you're a first year facilitator point of contact for your school team, really kind of plugging things into the calendar that you know are going to need to be done is kind of critical. So for example, a first year, if your goal is just simply making sure that you're having your meetings monthly, you've scheduled in, maybe reward events, and you want to make sure that you schedule in time to roll out your expectations, your calendar might be pretty sparse, whereas a team who's maybe in year 5 or 6 has things down, including things like the PIC and other implementation needs that we'll discuss further on in the chat as well. What other implementation components could be included in the PBIS team schedule that is not shown here? Could be things like looking at the events, when materials need to be purchased by, things like that. So again, it really gets tailored to your school's need, but the idea is that you have some type of working document that allows you to add to it as you go through the school year related to your action plan.
So in the meeting location, and realizing that in the real world, you don't have just a room that's dedicated only to your meetings, it may be an area or a classroom. It's important to have that schedule, maybe the instructional schedule or calendar for the year, your master schedule for the school, and this PBS implementation schedule all kind of integrated and located somewhere. But in addition to that, if you utilize an electronic calendar such as Outlook, to go ahead and send those invitations, so they'll be in everyone, on your team, everyone's calendar will reflect important dates for the school, for the district, and for your PBS plans. And then if you think through your role, if you're a district administrator or district coordinator, what are the important items that need to be in the calendars of all of your school points of contact or your school administrators? And then if you're a school leader, what are those important things that need to be in the calendars of each of your PBIS team members? So just thinking through so that when it's time to schedule an event or plan a meeting or work through a day that you might want to look at data, you'll have all of those important dates in the calendar electronically, so you're not having to look things up or find the calendar, but you've just got those things at your fingertips.
Yeah, and a lot of those important dates are going to be things like, when are we going to do our initial overview of our expectations? When do we expect teachers to have taught them in the classroom? Things of that nature, and it's decided amongst your team. So while there's no one set timeline for you, it's something that you put on your calendar, as we need to make sure that we address that. Again, within the team, you want to make sure that you have good representation. Those of you who are, in your first year early on implementation, these bullet points underneath where you are first year versus the ongoing implementing school are kind of the questions you want to be asking yourself right now at this point in the school year. So our first year teams, if it was not completed during your tier 1 training, who is taking on what roles and responsibilities? Make sure that's established at your first PBIS team meeting of the year so that you can then move forward from there. If there was people that, as you got trained, realized you want to invite them as part of your team, how are you going to invite them and assign them roles and responsibilities so that you can have that robust team that you're looking for? Same with the ongoing implementing schools, especially if you've had a lot of staff turnover. We have a lot of staff that we lost, and now we have roles that need to be filled. Maybe there's somebody on your staff who, fits a role better than another. How do we want to address that? And these would all be something that you'd want to probably do at your first PBIS meeting of the year. If you haven't already had that, that would be one of those actionable items that you want to address.
All right, so as was mentioned, and not to be redundant, but just remember to ensure that every stakeholder voice is represented on your team, or at least in your team discussions. And that includes folks such as grade level representation. So if you're in elementary school, great to have 1 or 2 teachers, but you want to make sure that someone kind of represents the voice of the kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade level versus the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade level. Important to know the input and voice of your stakeholders, such as food services staff, custodial staff, transportation, folks that sometimes we forget to include in our plans, and finding out from them the things that would be helpful in our discussions when we're looking at data and teaching expectations across different settings.
So now you have your team, you have the people there. What are we doing during that time? We talk a little bit about agenda must-haves, things that really help facilitate the problem-solving process and keep your team focused and on track. You want to make sure that you have an agenda that highlights, obviously, the things that are going well, because we're positive behavior intervention support. We want to stay positive. So we want to highlight those things that we're doing well. We also want to look at our data. So how are we carving out that time within our schedule and agenda to prioritize data, and how are we following up on things from our action plan from previous meetings. Things that we've seen work well when addressing whole school issues or action planning and brainstorming ideas is using roundtable format so that everybody who is represented, like Dama just said, we have representation from K through 2 and 3 through 5, but to make sure that their voice is actually heard, we do a roundtable format in our meeting and things of that nature. And then as a facilitator, you want to make sure you're opening and closing that meeting, not only on time, but reviewing those actionable steps so people walk away from your meeting knowing exactly what to do. We're going to show you a sample schedule and agenda in just a minute, but one of the things that I want you to think about is if you already have a very well-run, functioning, PSRTI team or MTSS team that focuses on the academics, that hits those key elements of, we talk about the celebrations, we look at the data, we follow up, we action plan. And if you already have a working template agenda for those things that your school and your staff is already familiar with, use that. There's nothing saying you have to use any of the agendas that we share. So I encourage you, if you've got something that works for you, use it if it addresses these key components. So
definitely, we're all about working smarter, not harder. So use things that work and help this to become the way of work and not something that's seen as separate or in addition to things that work well for you. You'll probably start to see a theme with me along using the Outlook calendar system. Obviously, that's one of my favorite things to do. But when you're keeping up with your action plans, it's important to have that in a shared space where folks can access the action planning document, maybe update it so that you can kind of have real-time updates on action items in between meetings. It would probably be a good idea to go ahead and attach that to your meeting invitation. And again, just to keep it simple, to make sure that folks know where to find that. So you're not having to dig through your emails or try to figure out who sent you the action plan, but it's just right there, always available in your Outlook invitation or in a shared space. And then in addition to the general location, important to maybe send some follow-up reminders to individuals who have action items. So for instance, if you know there's a meeting next week and there are some action items on there that specific individuals are responsible for, maybe shooting out just a reminder to those folks so that they remember the things that were assigned to them. And then finally, one piece that has been very successful for some of our schools is emailing out the action plan and or notes after meetings to your entire faculty and staff. And that just helps with transparent communication so that everyone is aware of the agenda, the things that are being discussed, the problems that are being problem solved, and ideas that are coming up for action items. And it just helps to continue with getting that buy-in from all the stakeholders because they feel like there's a sense of open communication, and maybe they can interject items that they would like to see you all discuss in your meetings.
And this is just a sample of one of the PBIS team meeting agendas that we provide to you. Again, this is something that can be found in your binder or on your wristband. It's also in that chat box as one of our download documents, but this is just a format that we provide to you. It's typable, but again, if you've got some format within your school system that already addresses all of these critical elements that your faculty and staff is familiar with, that would seamlessly flow into your PBIS team, by all means, utilize that. those of you who are in those advanced 5 years or more of implementation, maybe you've been the facilitator the whole time, or maybe you've taken on this role new, I encourage you to go back and look at your team meeting checklist and go through some of these items, because this lets you know, not only do we have that agenda to support our team, but is our meeting being run effectively so that we're able to address all those critical elements. Because there's a lot. There's a lot to be done in education, not just in the PBIS world, but in all aspects of education. And I know for me personally, I got to a point where if it didn't happen in a meeting, sometimes I felt like it didn't happen. So having that really well-run meeting and knowing that all the information is there in that agenda, in those notes, like Dama mentioned, that's being shared with everybody, it allowed for that cohesiveness. So go through those checklist items. That's something that you can work with your DCs as well to help make sure that you're hitting all of the critical components there. If anybody wants to share of other strategies that they've seen that support a well-functioning Tier 1 PBIS team related to the scheduling and the agenda, please feel free to do that now. I'll give you a couple seconds to see if anybody chats about that you want to share. One thing we talk about, well, I'll wait and see if anybody shares anything in the training, is that if we're spending a lot of time during our PBIS meeting just focused on how we're planning our rewards events or what tokens to buy, we're not really engaging in that problem-solving process. So this tool here is a really good thing to help you look at where are you spending your time as a facilitator for your school. Okay, I can't see anybody chatting, so I'm going to get ready to switch things over to Dama, who's going to kind of walk us through a little bit of where many schools start commonly after training and how that relates to some of those critical elements. All right, ready, Dama? Here you go.
All right, so I'm going to pick up here with the benchmarks of quality. And as a reminder, the benchmarks of quality is really the self-report, self-assessment that your team completes to really look at your implementation of the 10 critical elements. And I think it's nice and helpful to, as a reminder, as you go through the benchmarks of quality, that there are 10 critical elements, and to not really get bogged down in any one of them, because they're all important, and it's important that we're implementing with fidelity. So if you are a newer school team or a just newly trained school team, this is something that you did as a team during the 3-day training. And if you're a more seasoned or veteran team, you may or may not remember doing this for the initial time during training, but it's an assessment that's also done as a team annually and entered at the end of each year. But as a reminder, you can really do the benchmarks of quality anytime or as often as you'd like to. And we'll get into, I'm not able to advance my slide, so just bear with me a moment. There it is. This is what the benchmarks of quality looks like in graphic form. So you can see the elements across the bottom, and then the scores are the percentage of possible points scored across the different elements. And so what is helpful about looking at this in the graphic form is you can easily see a couple of areas here that would be in need of some action planning. So you see they're the lower scoring areas. And then this is what the benchmarks of quality looks like if you're looking at it from the perspective of progress monitoring over time. So this would be, of course, across 2 different years of implementation, and you can see the improvement from year 1 to year 2, but then you can still see those lower areas that might need some further action or to be focused in on for action planning. So let's go back and look at this and spend just a couple more minutes talking about what you would do as a team here. Of course, there's lots of work to be done across all the different areas. So what you can do is really hone in on those lower scoring critical elements and look at your effective procedures and lesson plans and determine what are some tangible actions that are going to be worked on to try to see some improvements in those areas that are lower scoring. And so what we're going to go through now is, as I think Brooke mentioned already, there's not research behind if you do this element well, then it's going to maximize your impact. But really more so, these are kind of like those tangible elements and common first steps for implementation. But also for those that have been implementing for a while, it's important that these things are in place and revisited. If you think about your expectations and your rules in particular locations, your reward system, lesson planning, your referral process. So we're just going to touch on some things to remember across those elements specifically. So let's think for a moment about those expectations and the rules in specific settings. It's important that you solicit staff buy-in. And remember that buy-in is an ongoing effort, so it's not just critical during that first year or two, but really it's important to make sure that you've built in ways to continue to work on staff buy-in, continue to work on hearing from all of your different stakeholders, to include students and parents and all of your teachers and paraprofessionals and support staff. If you recently were trained, you probably remember the ideal student activity. And I'll jog your memory if you were trained a few years ago. That's the activity that we do where you really think about what are some characteristics of the ideal student, and then kind of focus your efforts around teaching those expected behaviors. So what is it that makes the student ideal, and how can we teach those same behaviors to all students and all faculty, and really focus on those being the things we're looking for. And it's important to get feedback from folks. You could do surveys, or if you were recently trained or recently did some changes, you want to make sure you present those expectations as a draft to your coworkers and get some feedback on their take on those expectations. And this is just an example, excuse me, before I jump to the tip, of classroom expectations. So you could have something like this in the classroom, and then Brooke will share a little tip related to that for teachers.
Yes, as far as getting started and how to support your teachers with the expectations and rules, we want to make it as easy as possible for them, easy for them to access, easy for them to use. So, providing templated examples for them, sharing best practices for them regarding how to write their rules, that they're 3 to 5 positively stated, and how to align them with the school-wide expectations. And then having that follow-up fidelity piece of conducting informal walkthroughs. I used to do it a lot of the time. I imagine a majority of you are in pre-planning mode with your teachers getting their classroom ready. This is where I would kind of start walking through and asking them, do they have their blank classroom poster ready? Do they need anything from the PBIS team? Sending them out quick surveys, things like that during pre-planning, so that when they're ready to go, the visibility piece is there as well regarding the expectations and rules. One other thing, if you're one of our schools that's 5-6 years implementing, and you haven't already done so, what's your procedure for training new staff? We used to have a go-to new staff folder that was available, where in there was provided a copy of the matrix, a copy of our tokens, a discipline flow chart, copies of our forms, and a sample lesson plan. In hindsight, looking back, I'd probably even add in there a master calendar, look ahead, maybe even some sort of team directory, so that they knew who was their go-to person. If they're a 3rd grade teacher and they need support with PBIS, who can they go to? So just, having something that's quick and easy that supports the teacher in the classroom is critical.
Thank you.
On a tangent there, Dama, and I caught
that was good. And really kind of was making me think of the obvious reminder that the majority of students' day is spent in the classroom. So of course, that's where you're going to have a lot of opportunities for learning and teaching of the expectations, and having, teachers kind of leading the teaching of the expectations across different settings and during transitions. But it's important, to have that proactive classroom management plan. And I know as you were talking, Brooke, I was reminded that we've got lots of administrators and teachers on the TA chat today. So I can see this slide that I'm sharing with you now being helpful for both perspectives. As a classroom teacher, this implementation plan would be a helpful thing to use as kind of a guide to think through how the classroom rules align with the larger school-wide expectations. So really, if you think about your school-wide expectations, your classroom rules are really just teaching students how to demonstrate those expectations in your classroom setting. So you have a little autonomy about what that looks like in your classroom, but keeping it aligned with the larger school-wide expectations is critical. And then you'll see there on the left, that's an example of our implementation plan. And you'll see the section on procedures. So again, a classroom teacher can kind of walk through specific procedures, things that might be more procedural that you need to teach in terms of the routines and things that you do on a regular basis, and maybe having some reminders there on lesson plans and when you want to teach. Really be intentional and explicit about teaching expectations or procedures, classroom rules, and then thinking ahead proactively to your classroom acknowledgement plans, and how do you acknowledge students for appropriate behaviors? What are some things that you kind of have in place as your goals and your plan for the year to really acknowledge appropriate behaviors? And it's a great time to think through things like positive referrals and phone calls home, things that you really want to build in to build relationships with your students and the students' families, to really show that this is more than just the academic piece, but you're also really kind of leading the charge for teaching appropriate behaviors and some soft skills, employability skills, social skills, and life skills to your students. And then from that administrator's perspective, if you have teachers that put together a specific implementation plan like this example, that would be something that you could ask to take a look at, really just to kind of get an idea of what the plans are for each of your teachers. Might be something you could roll out as a template for them to use, just to kind of think through and organize their plans for the classroom. Whether it's a veteran teacher or a brand new teacher, it just really helps to map out the classroom management plan, which I think can be very helpful, and assist with the reminder of delivering those lessons. We've got lots and lots of classroom resources available that you can navigate on our website, and I'll talk a little bit about them.
Yeah, and I was just going to point out, can you go back just once real quick? I was just going to point out that that blue box there too is also just some really easy, quick little tips to support PBIS at the classroom level, and ideas, that you can do as a facilitator, so soliciting even some administrative support for maybe teacher incentives, highlighting a PBIS tip of the week. I saw somebody on the group chat talking about using this information to help present to new staff or teachers to give them an understanding of how PBIS works. And so you could certainly, integrate all of these tools into, faculty meetings, or like I said, a tip of the week, maybe you blast it out through your staff email, whatever's your effective mode of communication for your school. And then like Dama said, if you go ahead with our tip, go ahead, Dama, with checking out our classroom resources, our classroom management module, our classroom page, and also our classroom assistance tool are all good resources for you as a facilitator to go in there to help support not only your new staff or new teachers, but maybe a teacher who's been having some difficulty with the implementation in there as well.
Perfect. If you haven't seen the classroom assistance tool, or you're not familiar with that, I would encourage you to take a look at that. There are so many resources that we've got available that it can be a little overwhelming and time consuming. So if you do want to find out a couple of things that you can just quickly take away from that, the classroom assistance tool is very useful as a self-assessment or a self-reflection, really, not assessment, but a reflection as a teacher. And then if you're in a support role or an administrative role, that works with teachers on classroom management, it's often helpful for you both to complete that and then kind of get together and review your outcomes and do some kind of classroom level problem solving. So that can be a really powerful tool just to get some ideas on where to hone in on seeing some improvements at the classroom level when it comes to classroom management. So visibility of expectations and those rules by location. This is really something that's important as a team for you guys to determine where do we want to make sure we see those expectations posted, all over campus. What are the locations? Are there certain locations that you want to have the rules broken down for that specific area? These are just some examples of things that we have from out in schools. If you're a district coordinator, these are, maybe some ways that you could support your new points of contact at the school level is to do some walkthroughs on campus. Maybe consider doing a campus walkthrough within the first 9 weeks just to see visibility of those expectations, visibility of teaching of the expectations and rules by specific settings. And doing this in the first 9 weeks, of course, is a great time because there's often a lot of focus and emphasis on teaching expectations and rules and procedures. So you should see some visibility of that. And it would be a nice time to notice areas that might need to have expectations posted. So you can go ahead early in the year and address those areas that might need to be revisited. And then, important to do that ongoing, but definitely something that you could offer as a support during that first 9 weeks.
Yeah, and the purpose of kind of doing that quick walkthrough to self-assess during that first 9 weeks is because if you find during that walkthrough that you've missed critical areas on your campus in terms of the visibility, that you're able to add that onto your to-do list to make sure that those areas get covered. We also gave these examples of these student-created ones just to show that it doesn't have to be fancy, nice laminate posters or anything like that. It can be something quick and easy, especially for some of our newer schools who maybe you're still refining what your expectations are going to look like, and you're not ready to get that permanent printed product just yet. You can still certainly do this in this way and would also be a great way to teach those expectations as well. Yeah. One other thing to consider, those of you who are implementing beyond just those first initial years, your visibility, how far is that reach? Are we, are we reaching beyond our campus and getting into the home in terms of visibility within the family? We talk about in the trainings, and we see the examples of using technology through screensavers, things like that. So think about how can we increase the visibility of our expectations within our school community, because our school community is greater than the walls of our structure.
Absolutely. And then on the tip, you'll also see one thing, if it's possible in your district, to have maybe someone partner up from a neighboring school. So in one district that I serve, I know in the past they've done had an established routine where the discipline leader on a neighboring campus, you would kind of swap schools. So in this particular district, it was the dean of discipline of, let's say, a middle school would swap schools with another middle school and just do that walkthrough on another campus just to see some fresh ideas and give some feedback just from a colleague, someone that's not in an evaluative situation, just to get some good ideas and give some helpful tips and feedback during the first, semester of the school year and get some objective strategies from a coworker. So lesson planning is important, and it's often an area that schools struggle with. And so it's important just to think about that as one of those tangible things that could be action planned and worked on is teaching the expectations through specific lesson plans, introducing them across the different settings, and maybe having students walk through the particular location and go through examples and non-examples of the expectations in that setting. And then I'm really asking, as a team, how will you know if staff have taught the expectations, and what are the different settings that you're expecting the expectations to be taught in? And how can you pull together resources for staff to make that manageable and easy, and to know that it's taken place?
Right, so just providing a quick PowerPoint template for the teachers that they can use and edit for the lesson planning, or something like what you see on your screen with the big overall expectation. What does it mean? Examples, non-examples, characteristics. This is a great one that can then also be hung up in the classroom to refer back later. And making sure that your teachers know what is the communicated expectations for staff related to the rules in each setting. So again, that matrix. The last two tips there, creating a checklist for yourself to make sure that the locations, where the rules are to be taught, and how are we going to reward and acknowledge staff. That builds on not only your fidelity component, but again, the continued staff buy-in. So for those of you that are administrators, or those of you who work very closely with your administrator, how can we then acknowledge our staff who were able to get those lesson plans done? We were able to check on the fidelity. We know they were done. Is there some type of acknowledgement that we are able to give them as well? And remember, just start small, with regard to what's feasible for your staff. So, we're going to talk a little bit here about integrating your SEL into there. But if you're a first-year school and you're just really trying to get the bare bones thing started, what is really feasible for you right now? You may not have everything mapped out, but we have the first 2 weeks. We have every expectation to be taught in all of these locations. And then you can move on and do next steps as you move forward.
Sorry, I moved on thinking that you wanted me to move on.
I was getting ready to move on. Sorry.
I didn't mean to move you along. So really, it was a good transition into that need for the ongoing lesson planning, and to ensure, in addition to that beginning of year push and emphasis on teaching expectations to all students, but really thinking through your plans for monthly lesson plans or quarterly teaching and of the expectations, or almost like a booster training for students and staff on a quarterly basis. And really, what does that look like, kind of a year at a glance, as far as the ongoing lesson planning? So how might you all as a school team address the need for teaching behaviors in problem areas? Goes back to the importance of bringing data to those monthly meetings, and that way where potentially referrals are coming from. So maybe those are locations that really need to kind of have a booster or refresher training for students and staff on what the expectations are. And then if you're a school at high implementation level, how do you address lesson planning across tiers and throughout the school year, as you have students that need potentially group interventions, tier 2 support or tier 3 support? How do you identify those students that need that level of support, and what resources are available and ready throughout the school year to meet the needs of those students?
I think you hit on a couple of the tips already here, but really going back to just having that checklist for making sure that you've addressed the lesson plannings for where you're at now. If you know that you're going to have a need for ongoing lesson planning, but this is too overwhelming at the start of the school year, just make sure that you're putting that, going back to that implementation calendar, you're kind of putting a placeholder there that you're going to go back. And like Dama said, we're ready for maybe those tier 2 and tier 3 advancing of the tiers. We don't quite know how to do that yet, and that'll be addressed maybe in some of our later chats in the series with regard to data-based decision making, but putting that placeholder of, we want to, really focus in on our tier 2, tier 3 lesson planning, and tying those and integrating those together, and how to do that.
All right. And of course, as always, you want to acknowledge staff who do these things well. So just like we want our staff members, our teachers and folks to acknowledge students for doing, demonstrating those expected behaviors. If you're an administrator, think about ways, little things, big things and little things that you can do to acknowledge your staff for meeting your expectations and teaching student expectations. I will apologize now. I typically spell out an acronym before I use it. So SEL there is social emotional learning. And so just a word of caution, many of our districts and many of our schools have access to social emotional learning curriculum materials. Some have been disseminated at no cost to our districts, which is super helpful. But we have to make sure that those things are not seen as separate or in addition to the work that you're doing and teaching school-wide expectations. So those things really should complement or enhance your work and not compete with your work at Tier 1 and teaching the expectations. You want to make sure that as you're using those materials that they're aligned with expectations, which they naturally are, but it's important to kind of be intentional and integrate those initiatives within your PBIS framework. So it's not really seen as another thing on the plate of a teacher. And for you teachers, that you don't feel like this is something else being asked of you, but it's really a lesson plan that integrates with your larger PBIS framework and really aligns with the lessons that you're already developing. So for instance, if there is a lesson that you are expected to teach perhaps through Sanford Harmony, how does that tie in with the school-wide expectation, and how can you make that connection for your students and for your families around, let's say, being respectful and those types of things. So again, you just want to make sure that what you're doing and the way of social emotional learning is enhancing the 10 critical elements of PBIS and integrated within that framework and not seen as something separate or different. And now I'm going to turn it over to Brooke.
All right. Oop. All right, I'm going to take you through more of those tangible pieces. Again, for those of you who already have your reward system in place, this slide really here just is speaking to, again, those new staff members. Maybe those aren't as familiar with PBIS or who've been a little bit resistant about the why we reward behavior. And really the focus on why we reward behavior is it's really meant to be a teaching tool. And again, it's one of those tangible things that we can do. Often when people think PBIS, they start thinking of the rewards and what a reward system is. So we wanted to start here with, again, what makes it to be effective. And so what we know is that our reward systems are effective when we have input from the stakeholders. Obviously, rewards, in order for them to be effective, have to be of value to the person receiving the reward or reinforcement. We want to make sure it's easy for them to deliver. So if you have been using a system that just really has never seemed to take off, what are some of those barriers and why hasn't it taken off? We talk a little bit about, if you're using something like a token economy, how are we making it easy for our teachers and staff to access and provide that quick, immediate reinforcement to their students, and things of that nature. Coordinating your system with support from PTA, PTOs, and getting those free and low cost items and events. So, anything in your reward system that has been effective or has not been effective, please feel free to share again in the chat. But you want to make sure that it's clear, it's consistent with your staff as well. And Dama, as far as adding any tips and pointers beyond teaching, knowing all the different rewards, etc. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I think just that hierarchy. So, small rewards that, can be accessed on a daily basis, or, not like the big heavy hitters versus the things where if you have like a token economy and you're saving up for something larger, you just kind of want to have a hierarchy of things like a really between like a high five and a pizza party. Like, what are the different ways that students can be acknowledged for doing the right thing and keeping things simple? And don't forget to have that stakeholder input and buy-in from all folks, involved here: teachers, students, families, support staff.
Okay, and now we're going to just share with you a couple different examples. This is an example of like a token economy. This happens to be a high school. Some of the questions over there in the green section, the green box, are just questions for you when you're looking at this token economy. Is it clear what the frequency that the students can exchange these Bolt bucks in for? Is there something available for a backup reinforcer at even one Bolt buck? Other things you might want to consider with the staff using token economies is, are we limiting the number of Bolt bucks that each staff member is able to get and give out? Did we delineate who's running the store? It's something that's not created overnight. So those of you who are very early those who are very early in their implementation, you may not have all of these details work out. You may have a very simplistic, bare bones one, or it can be very sophisticated like this, because we don't call it stealing, we call it borrowing somebody else's system that's already in place and making it fit your environment. But again, start small, make sure it's very clear what earns the token. That's going to be those expected behaviors and how the students earn the token. And what they can be exchanged for if you're choosing to do something like a token economy. From there, you can start building and refining your system in terms of, exchange rates, having more variety, the frequency of reinforcement based on what your data starts to show you once you have it in place and are using it. Some alternatives to token economies are, again, some public recognition. Using class or grade level competitions are really good. We've seen the Golden Spoon Award for best cafeteria behavior, things of that nature related to those specific expectations. These are also really good alternatives if you do have a token economy, but maybe you want to target a problem area. That might be something to use, especially, our returning schools. Maybe looking at your data, you see there's a problem behavior with regard to tardies, and you're able to incorporate a class level competition related to that specific area. So those are just ways to do that. In addition to your token economies, you can have multiple different systems in place as long as it's clearly defined for all of those stakeholders as to what those areas are. So just another example of a positive student referral here from a middle school. So it's kind of the reverse of, an office discipline referral. What was the incident? It's related to the expectation that they followed, et cetera, et cetera. Anything you want to add there, Dama?
No, I would just say, I know I keep harping on adult rewards, but I think, again, if you just want to acknowledge folks for using strategies that you're encouraging. So if you're an administrator on the line and you want to emphasize having staff members use a positive student referral, then perhaps when those get submitted or listed, you'll see the teacher that submitted them, and their names could go in a drawing for like a gift card or special parking spot or something like that, just to encourage use of the positive system.
Okay, and I see we're getting close to the end of the chat, so I'm going to try and speed up a little bit, partially because I also talked a lot about this already, but just making sure that all stakeholders are have the opportunity to earn rewards, and that they're getting their feedback when it comes to the rewards. And again, getting that through some sort of surveys are always good. Just don't forget about them when you're building your reward system. I'm going to switch it back over to Dama here, and she's going to wrap us up with those are kind of our 4 elements that are our tangibles. But for those that are at that more advanced, ready to move on to further implementation drive, we're going to talk a little bit about utilizing that BOQ for that. All right, Dama.
You definitely want to look at your own benchmarks of quality, look at your walkthrough data, and really think through what are the areas that really need the most work on your specific campus. And also just keep in mind expectations, rewards programs, and lesson plans. They're tangible and they're things we can see. So kind of the ways we can see that PBIS is in place, but it's not going to be what sustains it over time. So you just want to make sure you're keeping an eye on implementation using your benchmarks of quality. And then the mid-year progress monitoring tool that we have, or that we encourage you all to use as a team, is our PBIS implementation checklist. And this is just a peek at what that looks like, but it's important to do that as a team. And I'll just go ahead and say this tip real quickly is that you want to probably add that to your agenda, meeting agenda. So if you utilize that Outlook calendar idea, then go ahead and plug in there for the October or November meeting that as a team, you want to complete the PBIS implementation checklist. And then don't forget, if you're the point of contact, to enter that into our evaluation system so that we can continue to keep that graphed for you to use. And then as you're implementing, just be sure that you contact your district coordinator for support in any of the areas that you guys as a team might need some additional professional development or technical support. If your benchmarks of quality score is less than 70, then you probably need to continue revisiting Tier 1 and classroom supports until you're implementing with fidelity. Also, if you're seeing increases in your discipline referrals or your suspension rates, again, you want to revisit Tier 1 and look at your plans as a school system. If you see that your benchmarks of quality scores are above 70% and you're seeing the discipline data indicating a decrease in your office discipline referrals and suspensions, then it might be time to really look at your efforts around supplemental, like Tier 1 support and Tier 3 supports. And we do offer technical assistance and professional development around those areas. So definitely want to contact your district coordinator if you as a school team are ready for that, and we can work with you. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was sorry, it's me again. I was just going to chime in here too, that if, you're looking at this slide saying, oh yeah, this is what I want to do. I want to, our school meets that criteria where our BOQ is high, our discipline data is going down, and I really want to start looking at those Tier 2 and Tier 3 and problem solve around that. That's where some of our additional database decision making is going to be coming into play. So look forward to some of those chats coming up as well.
Definitely, yes.
Give a little plug.
That's right. An example of the importance of using that action plan, like Brooke mentioned, you don't have to use the one that we provide. It is provided electronically to you all. So if you like it, you can certainly use that. But the important thing is to include some type of action planning document that you kind of can focus in on what needs to be worked on as a team and keep track of those action items. This is kind of busy and small font, but just an example from my previous district, Marion County. One of the things we worked on was just creating kind of a month-by-month timeline of important dates that the school point of contact and school administrators needed to have on their radar. And we found that this was helpful to talk about at the beginning of the school year to really plug those dates into everyone's Outlook calendar to really keep their items that they need to be working on each month kind of at the forefront of planning. So that was just one example.
And
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you can't tell, we kind of came full circle where we started with talking about kind of outlining your year with that implementation plan and your year at a glance. And as you add to your action plan and items to-do list, you're going to be building and creating that implementation plan as you go along. So it's ultimately not meant to be this is how it's done, but the idea is that as you see what your needs are, that you are constantly going back, revising, and putting it in there, because in the world of education, it is certainly hard to keep track of everything that's going on. And it's just important, I think, when you think of that teaming and the scheduling and agenda, to make sure that that piece is running smoothly so that everything else can come in and out from that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So that we really utilized all of your time, but we have been told to make sure to remind you that we do have additional chats coming up this year. That again, this is the first of a 3-part series with regard to coaching, but our next chat coming up on August 21st, de-escalation strategies, reducing restraints and seclusion. So if you're a school or a district that has that need, that would be a great chat for you to sit in on as well.
And just a reminder that I know sometimes you're not available to participate live. Glad you all were able to join us live today, but just know that these are recorded. So if you see a topic or you're not able to make it to one of the TA chats live, just know that they are recorded and you can listen to them at your leisure or as a team at a different date and time.
Here's our contact information. I'm going to see if there's anything that Betsy wants to chime in on at this time. But I do thank you very much. I'm going to ask Dama real quick. I had someone asking if you could maybe repost the link in the chat box for the downloads, but everything should be in the chat box for you to download. All of the sample templates were there. They're also on your wristband from any of the Tier 1 trainings that we've been to. If you need additional help with that, you can certainly contact